Welcome. Good evening. I'm Margaret Ann Tokaszewski, Director of the New Haven Museum. And thanks for joining us tonight for this much anticipated talk. To many baby boomers, the former New Haven Veterans Memorial Coliseum represents the glory days from Aerosmith to ZZ Top, even Elvis. This Elm City hosted some of the biggest names of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, along with minor league hockey, monster truck pulls, and professional wrestling. The New Haven Museum is commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Coliseum's first event, a hockey game on September 27, 1972, with tonight's virtual presentation, New Haven Coliseum, where baby boomers roamed. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to the Growing Up in New Haven Facebook page. We had such a tremendous response to our posts there featuring Elvis and the video contest, and people shared great stories. One woman who sat in front in the Elvis concert with her aunt and cousin and sister recalled meeting Elvis's girlfriend, Linda, and admiring her diamond necklace. Someone else posted a photo of his ticket stub. It cost $12.50 to see Elvis in 1976. And another person said he and his son were at the very last event at the Coliseum, which was a wrestling event. And when they left the building, they saw people carrying seats up State Street to their cars. So thanks again to everyone who shared stories, all part of New Haven history. And we'll be notifying winners of the documentary Last Days of the Coliseum via private messenger on Facebook. And when you come in to pick up your DVD, we hope you stay and look around and enjoy more New Haven history. So we're thrilled tonight to welcome our speaker, Rich Hanley, who's here to share the remarkable history of this New Haven icon. Rich is an associate professor of journalism at Quinnipiac University in Hamden. He's also co-director of the university's sports studies program. A graduate of the University of New Haven and Wesleyan University, he served as a journalist for local, national, and global media for 23 years in print, television, and online before joining Quinnipiac in 2001. He has produced, written, and directed Emmy-nominated documentaries for CPTV and PBS, including Last Days of the Coliseum, which you may have caught on Tuesday on CPTV. In 2007, he received the Charter Oak Society Distinguished Faculty Member Award from Quinnipiac. He founded the school's sports journalism graduate program in 2014, and he later became the first Frank H. Netter School of Medicine Outstanding Capstone Mentor for his work with a student in developing programs for youth hockey coaches to spot concussion symptoms in their players. He's also an assistant professor of medical sciences at Quinnipiac, where he co-mentors students pursuing health communications capstone projects. He's frequently interviewed by news media on the intersection of politics and technology and has appeared in media outlets ranging from the New York Times to Variety. We're so pleased to welcome you tonight, Rich.
Great to be here. I'm really happy to be here this evening to give this talk about the New Haven Coliseum, and what it meant to people, what happened there, and what happened to the building, and its somewhat tortured history. You had this intersection of cultural and technological elements here, and the story really comes down to the city of New Haven tried to do too much with too little space, and as a result, and too little money, and as a result, things didn't turn out as well as they planned. Tonight, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of one of the architectural wonders of the world, the New Haven Veterans Memorial Coliseum, designed by architect Kevin Roach. For half a century, the Coliseum has welcomed millions of visitors to see pro hockey, rock concerts, circuses, wrestling, and a host of other events. It has stood as a beacon at the gateway to New Haven off the Route 34 connector, attracting suburbanites who return to New Haven to have dinner, catch an event, and then maybe go out downtown for a drink afterward. If only. That was the dream of the Coliseum. But the transition to reality was quite dramatically different. From its inception in the mid-1960s to its demolition in 2007, the building stood as an example of a dream gone awry, of money that ran out, and the ever-changing nature of culture and generations. But there are those, tens of thousands of people, in fact, and some of them are here tonight, who loved it for what it was, flaws, failing concrete, and all that. It was the public den for baby boomers in the decades when they ruled the cultural terrain. Late 70s, early to late 70s, up through the 80s and 90s. As Coliseum Concert goer Dan Santoro remarked after the building closed, the Coliseum was one of the worst places possible to see a show, but we loved it. It was our home. And tonight we'll explore why it was their home, despite its manifest flaws that we will cover. On a January 2007 morning, thousands gathered to watch and share lighthearted stories about the Coliseum and events that happened there, who they met there over the decades. But the festive mood that morning didn't survive the explosive charges that brought the building down on itself. It was at that point that thousands of people realized that their story, their cultural story, had come to an end. But the sadness also reflected something deeper, something that the writer John Updike once mentioned in a New Yorker piece many years ago. Buildings, he wrote, have a function beyond the baldly utilitarian. And that's exactly the perspective from folks who went to the New Haven Coliseum. The New Haven Coliseum had a social existence that went far beyond the concrete, the steel, the ductwork, the seats, and even, in fact, the events there. Let's trace this, see when this dream started, when it went off the rails, and how people still went and found themselves and friends as an entirely physical community, seeing the same shows, same hockey games, same wrestling matches, how they loved every minute of it. And until the building came down, we were able to transfer that love onto their children. The idea for a publicly owned and operated entertainment venue began in the mid-1950s in New Haven. As Richard C. Lee, the mayor at the time, had launched a massive urban renewal experiment, flattening old neighborhoods and businesses to build highways into the city and other attractions such as the Chapel Square Mall, to lure suburbanites who had fled the city back to town. One idea, in fact, which was manifested in a letter, went to Walt Disney and suggested that Walt Disney build an East Coast version of Disneyland in New Haven, across from the train station. Disney did write back and say thanks, but no thanks. We need to go where the sun is shining 365 days a year in order for us to make any money in our investment. But by the mid-60s, the idea of a public entertainment venue for the middle classes, basically living in the suburbs, really began to build momentum. There was thought that the old New Haven Arena, which was opened in 1927, had outlived its utility, its usefulness, and was not really the place that would bring folks to the suburbs into town. Those of you who may remember the arena from the late 60s knew that it was in need of some work. It was in need of a facelift. And in fact, the Podoloff family, which owned it, did have plans to add another deck to it to increase the seating capacity to 8,000. But the mayor, Mayor Lee, dismissed that idea as impractical. So it stood there on the intersection of Orange and Grove Streets, until the Coliseum opened. But interestingly enough, the arena pretty much held the events that the Coliseum would hold. Yale hockey was the prime attraction when it opened in 1927. and along with an annual visit by the circus, ice capades, and other events, including car shows, home shows, and even indoor ski jumping, kept people coming into the building. The Photo Office, a private business, had to sell tickets in order to make the business work. So they really couldn't have the building dark. So they tried to fill it with events at all times and package it as entertainment, and most of it for families and whatnot. But even the idea of an indoor ski jump made sense because, as this photograph shows, they could sell tickets, and many people would go and buy tickets to see the event. But over the years, a number of pro hockey teams call the arena home, and none more popular than the New Haven Blades, beginning in the early 1950s. The Blades reflected New Haven's working class thoroughly. It's hard-nosed play, a lot of fighting, old-time hockey as it's called, enlivened Wednesday and Sunday nights, in the city. Wednesday night crowds weren't all that big, middle of the week, school and whatnot, but Sunday nights drew sold-out houses on many nights. Why? It was Sunday night, 7 o'clock, puck drop. People just loved the team. They loved the players. And one of the reasons why they loved the players, because the players seemed to be from the same sort of milieu they were from. The place smelled like cigars and cigarettes. As the photo shows here, you can see the haze of smoke wafted to the fluorescent lights above the ice. But people felt a sort of relationship with the players and with the team that's rare. And the Blades, in New Haven bonded over the years because of this. New Haven Register and the Journal Courier would cover the team thoroughly, profiles of players, game coverage, post-game, pre-game, that sort of thing. Even kids from local schools in the neighborhood would sneak away from the schoolyard at recess and go over to the arena when the Blades were practicing and collect pucks. So there was a sense of community in that building that really persisted for 2 decades. But New Haven was on the move under Mayor Lee. It wanted to become a global city. It attracted national attention, federal money, and other benefits for Lee's renewal plan. And he wanted to attract higher level teams to a publicly owned arena. He went so far as to try to get the Boston Bruins to move into the Coliseum, even before the Coliseum opened. He wanted to get a commitment. The Bruins at the time, as the Celtics were, had been complaining about the old Boston Garden, and Lee thought he saw a wedge that could drive the teams from Boston to New Haven. That turned out to be the first of many absurd proposals that drove the Coliseum's momentum toward construction and opening. I mean, it must be noted at this point that the Coliseum would not be unusual in the wave of publicly financed venues for middle-class entertainment. Prior to the 60s and 70s, the buildings were owned by folks like the Photo Office, private citizens putting private money to work and packaging entertainment and selling that entertainment to a wider public. There was no really governmental involvement in this. That had changed by the 60s, and governments began to see it as their job to bring the middle class, which had fled cities, back to the cities for entertainment as a central location, as it does, with arts, restaurants, and so on. They thought entertainment in the form of professional hockey and other sports and events would be perfect. Usher Andy Paris is the enduring link between the New Haven Arena and the Coliseum. He worked at both as an usher. And as such, he saw the shift in fans, he saw the shift in culture and in generations. But there are still folks who went to the arena and then went to the Coliseum who would look for Andy to help them find their seats. He's the personal manifestation of that generational shift. And he went along with it because he loved his job as an usher at both venues. And he's a memorable character in the history of New Haven entertainment. One problem with Lee's plan to build the Coliseum was where are you going to put it? Urban renewal had pretty much taken all the available spaces. Done, Chapel Square Mall, housing, projects, and whatnot, had really consumed most of the available land. But Lee still wanted a Coliseum. And in 1965, he announced that one would be built. He was forced to settle on an 8.5 acre site adjacent to the Oak Street connector and straddled by Orange Street and State Street and George Street. As you can see here, this is not a big site for a 10,000 seat arena, because it's not just the arena you need parking. And there was nowhere in this area to put a parking lot that could hold 2,400 cars. That amounted to a significant architectural challenge. And it was one architect, Kevin Roach, had to tackle immediately when Lee asked him to design the Coliseum in unison with his Knights of Columbus building. Lee wanted the two structures to form a gateway into New Haven from the Oak Street connector, Route 34. Folks would drive in from 95 and 91, and there would be this magnificent Knights of Columbus and this magnificent New Haven Coliseum to greet visitors, and visitors would see New Haven as a city on the move, a city with world-class entertainment and world-class office space. But Roach understood he had a significant hurdle to overcome. And that was, what do you do with the cars? You can't have a surface lot for 2,400 cars. There really wasn't space for a multi-decked or multi-tiered lot adjacent to the Coliseum. So he looked around at other arenas in the United States, visited Detroit, and saw Cobo Hall in Detroit, which had a parking level on the roof of its arena. This is an older building that didn't hold that many people, but Roach said, aha, this is the solution to our problem. We're going to put the cars on the roof. And for many reasons, that turned out to be a decision that he was forced to make, but one that turned against him ultimately in the life of the Coliseum. And Roach also needed to select the right kind of, with his architect John Dinkeloo, the right kind of steel, to hold all these cars and serve as the roof of the Coliseum, and he had to get the cars up there with structures and so on. And he had to do it without the need to paint the steel every so many years, because that would add to the operating cost that would make the Coliseum prohibitively expensive. So he hit upon a steel called Corten by Bethlehem Steel, which had manufactured the steel. Corten steel is a self-sealing or self-weathering beam that is, when it rusts, the rust actually protects the steel. It doesn't shed, or it's not supposed to shed flakes or otherwise rot. So Roach and Dinkeloo said, this is the answer. We're going to make the steel infrastructure out of Corten steel. It's not going to have to be painted. It's going to be durable, etc. But there was some internal criticism, like, who wants to sit under 2,400 cars full of gasoline? Well, the city overlooked those criticisms and allocated $19.5 million to build an arena with a parking garage on the roof. And perhaps a sign of bad luck to come, it rained on the day of the official groundbreaking in May of 1969. So instead of having it outdoors, it was moved inside, and Mayor Lee broke ground on a table at the Park Plaza Hotel. Everyone's happy in this picture. It was a dream of Lee's to have this capstone project for urban renewal, to have it as a gateway to the city. But it was an ominous sign for things to come. Roach knew that the Corten steel, the steel infrastructure, would really be almost too severe to be attractive. So he softened the whole design. He put a drop ceiling so that people wouldn't look at ductwork and the concrete floor of the first deck of the garage. That was one of the things he did. He also planned for translucent panels at either end of the garage, so it would show light, a certain lightness, as if the garage was floating above the Coliseum instead of stomping on it like a boot. He also had a glass enclosed exhibition hall, which would let light pour in and again be very appealing to people walking into the building. And instead of having the helixes clad in just the steel without cladding, he planned to brick them over with the same brick that he used at the Knights of Columbus, so the harmony of design. Work began, in 1969, but it was clear that this building was going to cost more than $19.5 million. And there was no guarantee that they were going to get a hockey team there. Lee was not interested in New Haven Blades moving there. He wanted an NHL team or at least an American Hockey League team. When it became clear that the costs were going to outrun the budget, and this happened during construction, the city acted decisively, too decisively, some say. The city eliminated the exhibition hall and its glass cladding. It ordered Roche to eliminate the translucent panels, so the garage wouldn't be floating or seemed to be floating above the Coliseum. It would be plopped on it. And he ditched the idea for cladding the helixes in the same brick he used for the Knights of Columbus building. So basically, amid construction, the city decided to go with a design that was not what the architect had intended, particularly in the visual spectrum. Something else happened around construction, during construction. Bethlehem Steel warned Dinkeloo and Roche that the steel they were using would over time be rotted by the New England weather, the salt coming off of Long Island Sound, salt coming off of cars. They were very, very much concerned about their product being misused. But John Dinkeloo, a great engineer, came up with a solution. He decided to put steel mats on each deck and pour the concrete through those mats. Now, this all comes into play in the destruction of the Coliseum. Finally, after more than 3 years of construction, cost overruns, cutbacks, there were also some 20 strikes by labor unions working on it that delayed opening. The building opened on September 27th, 1972, with a hockey game. Unable to attract an NHL team, unable to attract a team to move from the American Hockey League, Lee, city officials, and a group of private investors decided to create their own team, a new team that would be named the New Haven Nighthawks. That name was selected from a name at the team contest sponsored by the New Haven Register. So that launches a new era in hockey with the New Haven Coliseum. Unlike the Eastern Hockey League, these players weren't really part of the fabric of the community. Players were called up by AHL teams, NHL teams, the Islanders or the Minnesota North Stars. So the players would cycle through. They really wouldn't have a residence in New Haven. They wouldn't have a sort of a cultural place in the city from which fans could run into them, say hello, as the Blades did. So there was really no team connection between the team and the city. It was in all respects a minor league team and it performed the duties that a minor league team is supposed to do, which is to prepare players for the parent club in the NHL. But nevertheless, in the first few years, the team drew enormous crowds, and it was really good hockey, much better than the Eastern Hockey League, because of the caliber of player that was attracted to the NHL, hoping to get into from the AHL to get into the NHL. Mayor Bart Dyer was one of 10,000 fans who went to that opening game. And it was quite the sight. These folks had never been in the Coliseum before, but they thought its design was somewhat odd. And this was the first time they had a chance to see it. So they would drive in and then look at this photo. Note how tight the entrances are to that helix. You know, there were two of them, one on each side. And this was not the era of compact cars. Big old Pontiac Bonnevilles, you know, that sort of thing, big cars. And so what the visitor first encountered was this little tunnel into a spiral ramp. There's a shot of the spiral ramp. Fans had to figure out how to drive up it, how to turn the wheel hard, how to not scrape against the guardrail, how to get up to the decks 1, 2, or 3 where they could park their car. Things were so precarious for some drivers, they refused to go up it, and city employees were stationed along the way, and they would drive the car up. It took fans a long time to get used to the helixes, because they had really never encountered that sort of parking system previously. Once they park their car, so they drive off the connector, say, up the helix, park their car, and they had to go down to the bowl below. And to get there, they had to take escalators, which were steeply designed to get folks to the concourse level. Every now and then, the escalators would not work. Every now and then, the escalators would lurch to a stop suddenly. This happened on more than one occasion where folks were injured. So it was quite the trip just to get into the building. But once in the building, the fans saw something that was unlike the arena. It had wide concourses. It was brightly lit. There were plenty of places to sit. The seats were generally all good because of the way they were raked up, and then when the box design took out those sort of corner seats that aren't really worth the money to pay to sit there. What's really weird about this is that the whole idea of the Coliseum was to get folks into New Haven. But if they went to the Coliseum, chances are they never physically set foot on a city street or sidewalk. They would drive in, park, escalator concourse, go to the seat, watch a game, watch wrestling, go to a concert, get up and leave. Down the helix, off they go to the connector and up to their suburban homes, down 95 or up 91 or out Route 80. And that's quite the defeat when you build something that to get people to stay in town, that they come and go. And Roach had predicted this. In 1965, Roach wrote that, hey, we need to have more than a hockey team here. We need to have more than just an arena or Coliseum. We need to have an entertainment district. We need to have storefronts. We need to have places where people can walk, movie theaters, a symphony hall, that sort of venue, smaller than the Coliseum, but one that would fit a different type of audience. The city declined to do any of that stuff. So it just plopped the building in the 9th square, unfinished, and said, okay, go to town. Let's make some entertainment here. For boomers, though, for many of you out there, it didn't matter. They were just there to see the event. They weren't interested in urban renewal. They weren't interested in spending time in the city of New Haven. They wanted to see a hockey game, a rock concert, a pro wrestling match. They wanted to see stuff, enjoy it with their friends and family, and then go home. And boomers, younger boomers, for example, would go to events with their parents at first. Then when they got to their early teens, maybe an older brother would drive them to an event, a hockey game that maybe the parents wouldn't go and attend. So you had young boomers joining older boomers, those in their late teens, going to events together. So you had this generational theme. So you had an entire generation covered of going to events. And ironically, when the building opened, rock bands couldn't wait to add New Haven to their tour list. The ecosystem of rock music was just really percolating when the building opened. You had FM stations like WPLR New Haven, WACN in Hartford playing album-oriented rock, the kind of rock that kids wanted to listen to, that would want to go see in a concert instead of one-hit wonders showing up, or other bands that really didn't have sort of credibility that FM radio gave the bands that would play at the Coliseum. And ironically, the city of New Haven really didn't want rock and roll bands to play there. They wanted, and Lee thought that the Coliseum was for Frank Sinatra and Lawrence Welk. It wasn't for bands like Chicago and Yes and Bruce Springsteen, Joni Mitchell, performers, Whitney Houston. And he wanted it for family-only entertainment. And Jimmy Kopalik, the great promoter who brought many, many acts to New Haven, as a promoter with his partner in business, Shelley Finkel, he said that the city would not let him advertise shows at the Coliseum as rock shows. He had to use the word pop, which was the word they used when they hold shows at the Yale Bowl. The New Haven JC's pop concert, they couldn't use rock. But after a while, it became clear that the New Haven Coliseum could not survive without rock and roll music, and could not survive at all without a constant train of rock bands piling through the Coliseum, bringing 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 fans in to the building. And top rock attractions would lead to a tradition that began at the Coliseum, where fans would camp outside the box office and wait for tickets to go on sale. And that was another layer of community. If you're waiting in line for tickets to the Grateful Dead, you'd bond with other fans of the Grateful Dead. If you're going to see Yes, you'd bond with other fans of Yes. If you were going to see Springsteen, you'd bond with other Springsteen fans. So these communities evolved out of waiting in line, and then they'd see each other at the show. How you doing? What's going on? So the building did serve its great communal purpose through rock and roll, and that this whole generation, which was consuming rock music in prodigious amounts, would gather at the Coliseum to watch shows. Yes, they would smoke marijuana. Yes, they were there to have a good time, but that was part of the ritual they engaged in, sometimes a few times a month. There are some fans who would go to dozens of shows a year. They may be marginal fans, but if the band was playing in New Haven, the tickets were inexpensive, they'd go. Why not see the show, see some friends, have a good time? So the building was very successful on that front. And bands across the spectrum of rock music would show up in a given month and a given week even. You'd get Southern rockers such as the Marshall Tucker Band and the Allman Brothers Band. You'd get funk bands such as Parliament showing up there. It really had a great eclectic draw for fans of all kinds of different music. And these fans would, as the photo shows, gather and talk and have a good time. So you had acts like Parliament and Madonna join acts like Frank Sinatra at the Coliseum. In 1975, in the 6-month period, Frank Sinatra, Elvis, and Bob Dylan played at the Coliseum. 3 acts that spanned pretty much the entire generational population of the region. You had the greatest generation, Frank Sinatra. Early boomers, Elvis, and Bob Dylan, the voice of the boomer generation, played the New Haven Coliseum. Dylan's show was quite interesting. He played a daytime set and then had followed that up with a nighttime set. And rock and roll acts came up from New York, and people like Springsteen, Joni Mitchell, etc., came up to New Haven to see the shows. 2 sold out shows at the Coliseum. Whitney Houston shows up to a sold out house in 1987. The voice of her generation shows up there. And boomers demanded to see these shows. There's the Jay Giles Band, for example. Jerry Garcia, he showed up with his own band and with the Grateful Dead on a number of occasions. Puff Daddy and Family. The Who played the Coliseum just days after a number of concert goers were killed at one of their concerts in Cincinnati. They dedicated their New Haven show to the victims in Cincinnati. And then we just go through the tickets. These become keepsakes for the fans who went to the Coliseum in the 70s and the 80s before Ticketron kind of took over the whole ticketing business. So these tickets, these stubs, are in the basements and the scrapbooks of hundreds of thousands of people in this region. Many of you, I'm sure, have stubs. You know, Barry White shows up there, Bob Dylan again. There's the Elvis ticket, Joni Mitchell, Kiss, Springsteen, Queen, John Denver in concert. He played in the round. And of course, Ted Nugent. Now, Nugent almost caused the Coliseum to ban rock music because at one of his shows, his fans took it a little too far outside and overturned a bus. And Nugent himself was banned from the Coliseum for a while. But the city leaders understood that without rock and roll, the Coliseum would be bankrupt. In southern New England, you went to the Coliseum to see rock and roll. And don't forget, New Haven was competing with the Hartford Civic Center until the roof collapsed up there. It was competing with the Providence Civic Center, Springfield Civic Center, the Worcester Centrum, and of course into New York, some of the haunts in New York, including Madison Square Garden. So they needed the shows. They needed to keep this region filled with rock and roll concerts to stay alive, to keep in business. And the region certainly supported the acts. Hockey was a mainstay. You guaranteed 40 dates a year. So 40 nights a year, there'd be a hockey game featuring the Nighthawks against the other AHL team. If they went to the playoff, you did a handful of other games. So rock and roll and the hockey, you had some dates, and you're getting up over 100 dates a year where the building was lively. And hockey was particularly important to many New Haven folks. They remembered the Blades, and they went fondly on to the Nighthawks and became loyal fans of the Nighthawks. It was good, solid hockey. They adopted players, those who stayed on the roster for a time became heroes to them. Guys like Tom Colley, probably the greatest Nighthawk. He played 7 years with the team. And as a result, had a loyal following, very fond of New Haven. And the fans repaid that loyalty. And that was evident in this one section called Section 14. You can see the person's t-shirt, Section 14 Goon Squad. They were raucous. They were a throwback to the old New Haven arena crowd. Only a new generation. They were loud, they were boisterous, they were sometimes obscene, sometimes to the point where people would complain. But they were fans, and they would get on the other team. They would chirp the other team. They would harass the other team while rooting strong for the Nighthawks. And Section 14 became very prominent in the Nighthawks' run to the Calder Cup Finals. The Calder Cup is the trophy that the American Hockey League champion gets. And the Nighthawks in 88-89 grinded their way to the Calder Cup Finals against Adirondack. And unfortunately, they lost. But there seemed to be a revival in hockey. You're getting 8,000 and 9,000 people for hockey in New Haven in spring. And the community really rallied behind the team. But unfortunately, that was the last good moment for the New Haven Nighthawks in the American Hockey League in New Haven. Of course, there are other things to fill the nights at the Coliseum. Monster trucks. Just take a look at the background of this picture. Look at the crowd for a monster truck rally. They had these every year. Circus. Every year would make an appearance at the Coliseum. It got to the point where youngish baby boomers went to the circus with their parents. Later would take their kids to the Coliseum to see the circus. So they would have this generational relationship. Well, I went here as a young boy like you, you're a young girl like you, here I am, now here we are together again at the circus. I mean, it's just quite the attraction for families. There were boxing matches. And of course, pro wrestling. With ring announcer, Hall of Fame ring announcer Howard Finkel. Howard loved the New Haven Coliseum. He loved being the ring announcer there. He enjoyed the crowd. He enjoyed getting to know the ushers. He enjoyed getting to know the people. And the WWE itself loved putting on cards at the New Haven Coliseum. They loved it so much that they would tape national shows at the Coliseum. And it is a point of note that the final event at the Coliseum was a wrestling match. It kind of comes full circle in that respect. Hockey, however, had left. The Nighthawks became the Senators. They didn't draw anybody. So they went. The New Haven Beast came in the late 90s. They came and went. There was a United Hockey League team in there for a season that came and went. Hockey was done by the end of the 20th century. It just was not possible to support a pro hockey team in New Haven. But the wrestling shows kept coming in. However, earlier, folks going to the Coliseum had noticed this. They had noticed rust stains on the piers holding up the garage. And they were not just in one place. Something didn't seem right. Rust was dripping, drip, down from the parking deck onto the piers, staining the concrete. By the mid-1980s, in fact, concrete started to fall out of the Coliseum itself. So much so that the city had to install netting to keep pedestrians from being hit by shards of concrete. What had happened was what was predicted. There was a flaw in the building. In winter, cars would carry salt, swept up from the highways after snowstorms and ice storms. The cars would sit on the three decks, and it would drip water as it melted, as the snow melted from their cars, including the salt. That leached through cracks in the concrete. That in turn hit the steel matting that Dinkeloo had put in place to hold the deck together. Once the rebar started to rust, it started throwing off concrete. And that meant the building was functionally doomed. And the decision to cut the exhibition hall and not to use the translucent panels and not to use the storefronts, not to put some other entertainment venue, smaller ones, somewhere near the Coliseum, meant that despite hockey, despite rock concerts, most days of the year, the Coliseum was dark. And it became a menacing presence, in the ninth square. And so the city had to fix the garage, decided to fix the garage and spent almost as much as it cost to build a Coliseum to fix the garage, at least partially, but most of the garage had to be shuttered. And there's the helix closed down with a chain in front of it. The escalators had to be shut down. There's the building died a slow death. By 2002, it became clear, if you want to save the Coliseum, you're going to have to spend tens of millions of dollars, and it's really not worth it. The Bridgeport Harbor Yard Arena had opened. Mohegan Sun in Eastern Connecticut. The Hartford Civic Center was now a 15,000 seat arena. There really was no rational reason to spend $30–40 million on the New Haven Coliseum, according to city officials. So they decided that it was over. And in 2002, that was it, August 26, 2002, a wrestling match was the last event held there. And fans carted away things like signs, seats, and the city itself held like a tag sale or invited people to come in and take what they wanted as souvenirs of the building. And finally, in January 2007, the building's run came to a finale when it was imploding. And the day, interestingly enough, started out as a festive event. I mean, it was You got there before dawn. Temple Street Garage was packed with people. Folks in the perimeter of the safe zone were partying. A rock and roll band was playing, I think, in the Temple Street Garage. But you know, as soon as the building came down, the festive mood ended. People realized what they had lost. And it was not just the building. It was they had lost what made them young, what made them happy, which made them a community. And that's the biggest loss of all in a Coliseum decay and demolition. That community, which could always go there with their kids and grandkids if they're had that sort of family, they'll have that chance no longer. But one thing they do have, one thing you all have, is that you all shared a time and a place that will never be duplicated. And no one else, the younger generation, will not be able to comprehend how much joy you got out of that building, how much ownership you felt in that building, and how much camaraderie you developed over the years with folks who like the same music, like the same songs, you know, like the same vibe as you did. So I'd be happy to take any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for going through all that. I think, you know, there's just so much, honestly, that happened. And so covering it in 45 minutes or 48 minutes is like, I mean, I'm sure everybody has stories, and as people start to, you're more than welcome to either in the chat or in the Q&A section, please add your questions, and I'll kind of moderate through them and talk through them with our guest here. And I think we set up a few posts on Facebook, and I think everybody kind of wants to share their memories. But I really want to take the time to be able to have you answer questions while you're here. So if you're sharing memories, we really appreciate it. Share them on our Facebook. You share your pictures, share your ticket stubs, share all that stuff. But what after listening to you talk about the mechanics of it getting built, and then all the shows that were on there, what's some of your fondest maybe memories, either sports or concerts or wrestling? What are some of your favorite events that you maybe attended or saw there?
Well, I had the great fortune to play high school hockey, and I wasn't in New Haven, but we would play at the New Haven high schools at the Coliseum, and it was always a cool thing to say, hey, I'm skating on the same ice as pros are. And interestingly enough, the New Haven Coliseum ice was considered to be the best ice in the American Hockey League. It was the way it was groomed, the way it was, you know, the way that it was constructed and everything like that made it to be a really hard ice surface with a little give, just enough to throw up some snow and whatnot. But playing high school hockey there was always a treat, because I sat in those stands and watched the Nighthawks play, and there I am skating on the same ice. The concert I really enjoyed the most was really the Bob Dylan afternoon show in November 1975, because it was so trippy. I'm going to the Coliseum for brunch, it seemed like. And then there's Bob Dylan showing up, and it's dark in the Coliseum. And when you see shows there, you're used to getting out and it's dark. I get out and blinded by the light. You know, it was a great show. I really enjoyed the Rolling Thunder Review tour. And it was a sold out house. And we all of us walk out of there and do this as a collective group. Say, what? Going on. So Grateful Dead shows are always good there. Springsteen shows are always cool there. Yeah. There's a lot there. I didn't go there as much after I graduated college as I had during college and the first few years afterward. But I would always check in to see what acts were playing, and if there was something attractive, I'd say, hey, let's go see it. Let's go see a show. Let's go to a home show just to walk around, see what's offered, just to get in the building again, you know, and see what's cooking.
Were there any ones that you camped out for, had to wait for tickets, and what was that experience like for you?
Yeah.
Because I don't think people, like you say, there's a loss of experience when a building like that goes. And so even today, the idea of standing in line for tickets or waiting for tickets, the lines are now, you're sitting at your desk hitting refresh, like just waiting for it to come up. It's like from Big Bang Theory. It's like refresh, waiting for the tickets to come up. What was the experience like for you? You know, if you stood out for tickets or knew people that, what was that like?
I did. Yeah, I slept out twice. I slept out once for Springsteen and once for the Grateful Dead. And it was, you know, it was a community out there because I wasn't the only one. You were with some friends, and then you met people, became friends with them because you'd see them later on at the show. You know, the show appeared a few months later. So you'd stay out there. The police would drive by to make sure everyone was cool. But it was, you were out there. It was a little bit of an adventure. You wanted to see the show so bad you'd be willing to bring a sleeping bag and sleep on the sidewalk to get tickets. But you would just meet people with similar perspectives. They may have, you know, at least in the Grateful Dead, they may have bootleg tapes that you didn't have. And if you had to go to the bathroom or something, folks would certainly, you know, keep your place in line. You wouldn't lose your place in line if you had to go to the bathroom or something. They would watch your place for you. They'd watch your sleeping bag and your backpack for you and that sort of thing. So it really was a community. And then you wouldn't see these folks for a couple of months, and then boom, the show comes, and there they are. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? How you doing? What's up? How you doing? What's up? How you been doing? Everything okay? You know, that sort of thing. You've seen the other shows, and you felt like you were part of a community. You know, a community that revolved around the band, but it actually revolved around an attitude. It was, hey, this is our generation. We're young. We're doing stuff like camping out for tickets, and we're meeting new people, which was always a big thing. This generation is huge. The baby boom generation is enormous. I think 57 was or 55, 56, 57 was the 3 big years. So folks around my age, we were all kind of the same age, had the same kind of vibe going on, read the same kind of books, but they would read some off-kilter books that they'd share with us. And, you know, it was just fun. It was a good time.
Any lasting friendships made out of some of those encounters, or were they just momentary friends for them?
They were friends for concerts. You know, you'd see them at shows, you'd see them at other shows too. But no, you wouldn't. Those friendships were kind of ephemeral in that you'd be there, then you grow up, and then you get a little distant from that vibe. You get a little distant from the concert scene, and you try to hold it together by listening to the radio. But then what you find is that, you know, the new generation's coming in, new acts are coming in, and the acts that you want to see are no longer touring. So you no longer see those folks again. But I'm sure there were definitely, from what I witnessed out there waiting for tickets, I'm sure there were definitely some marriages that came out of that process. In fact, I'm pretty sure of that.
So do you have your ticket stubs? Do you have your?
I don't know why. I always kept ticket stubs for not only Coliseum gigs but football games, ticket stubs from other venues like in New York City, that sort of thing. I don't know why that was. You just kept it as a souvenir, I guess. I mean, I got a piece of a goalpost from the 1973 Army Navy football game. What do I do with this?
Everybody grabs something, right? Like
you want some memorabilia from what you did as evidence that you actually did it. And I think that was particularly enriching during the period of time of the 1970s and 80s. You know, because it meant something to go to a show. You really didn't have a lot of money to go to a lot of shows. Obviously, you had 3 television networks, maybe 4 television networks. Entertainment options were limited. And so when you had a chance to go see a show, you wanted a piece of that show in the form of a stub.
Yeah, I think the idea of the tactile connection and collecting things is changing. And we see that in a lot of other areas too, where the idea of having the thing isn't as important now as the experience. And back, you know, as we look back at past generations, I think there was something about like holding the thing, keeping the thing, and the memories that were connected to it. So it's really interesting to kind of see like the loss of that, but what's going to replace it. So it's always interesting to also see how it changes and still stays the same. I think that there are still those connections, they're just in a different form.
It's just in a different form. That's right. It's just a generational shift, a cultural shift. But people still, I think, feel the same way about artifacts, whether they're digital or in the physical world. I think they still feel a connection in some tangible way to the experience, and they'll just flip through their photos on their phone when trying to resurrect the memories of the past. Well, we'll just go to our box of memories. You'll pull out some ticket stubs. There's Dylan, there's Springsteen, there's the Dead, there's Marshall Tucker, there's the Allman Brothers, Clapton, Santana, Joni Mitchell. And you just hold on to the stuff close, because at the time it meant the world for you to have that, and you kind of resuscitate that sensibility when you feel that stuff again.
So we're starting to get questions, and so I'll start reading off some of them. But I want to ask you one last thing for me is what's the one show or event that you are sad that you missed, or like just the one that you just couldn't get, you really want to see but you couldn't get to?
Probably be 1977 Springsteen. That was the one I couldn't go to. I've been a big Springsteen fan for years. I like, to me, it's a bar band. I like bar band type music. And when he first, emerged on the scene in the 1973, I thought, wow, I can get into this sound and whatnot. So that was the one show that I just couldn't get to that I wish I had seen. I've seen it. I saw him after that at the Coliseum in '78. That was a great show. So it was the show. And there's some things I missed. I miss going to a random hockey game. I go to let's go to a hockey game. I know I go to college, Yale or Quinnipiac, and see those schools play, and that's fun. But the crowd was always a spectacle. Sometimes the crowd was more of a show than the performer. And when you go to a Van Halen show, man, and Roger Caitlin says in the documentary film, Roger, a music critic, he said you'd see people at Van Halen shows that you never saw anywhere else. You never saw them at the mall. They were just there. They would just appear at the Van Halen show, then they disappear. And I could buy into that comment for sure.
Professional concert goers, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump into questions. I'm going to try to keep them as close to what they're asking as possible. I might kind of truncate stuff. So we got a couple questions, just like housekeeping. We do have a lot of photos in our photo archive, so reach out to that. Rich, is there any place specifically that you would look for, or that you use for photos for the presentation or for people looking for more information?
Oh yeah. I mean, the New Haven Museum was essential to the completion of the documentary. All those New Haven Blades photos, those New Haven Arena photos, they're at the New Haven Museum. And those are quite valuable because folks didn't ordinarily bring cameras, to games. They didn't have the money to bring a camera with a flash. They just didn't have it. But a New Haven Register photographer donated his negatives to the New Haven Museum, and I went through them and printed some out, and they are an extraordinarily valuable piece of New Haven history. Yale Manuscript and Archives has a lot of the Richard C. Lee stuff. Lee donated his papers, photographs. Kevin Roach's papers are at the Yale Manuscript and Archives. I tell you, I caught a big break in that, in doing the documentary, which came out in 2010. Roach had donated his materials, that include drawings, the sketches of the Coliseum, that sort of thing, plus his letters to Lee and other city officials. And when I was doing the research, Yale had just finished their accession process of cataloging all the materials. So I walked right into it. Must be my lucky day. But and I think the memories that a lot of people donated stuff to me. I put a call out on Facebook and through some websites, and I posted notices in city libraries and historical societies throughout the region. Tickets, photos, memories, call me, write me an email. And the most valuable stuff to me was the personal stuff that people held, because each artifact had a story. There's a reason why they kept it. And I got to interview them and ask them why they kept that sort of thing.
And the other question is, will we broadcast this? Yeah, so it'll be live. It'll stay on our Facebook page and it'll be on YouTube in a few weeks. So if you missed it or you missed part of it, you can go back and watch it. So one of the questions we have is, when talking about it and running the Coliseum, the name Jim Perillo and his impact on So what would you say his impact was, or talk a little bit about his role in keeping the Coliseum going?
Well, Jim kept the thing going. I mean, I think it would have closed much earlier without his um, creativity and passion for the building. I didn't mention any of the Coliseum directors. They had some good ones. They had some ones that weren't as passionate as Jim, but Pro he's a key figure in New Haven history. And people like that don't come along there all the time, that care about the building as if it was their building, and cared about the fans, the hockey fans, the wrestling fans, the rock fans, cared about the community. We thought that was the Coliseum was a great asset to building community. So people I talked to about the Coliseum directors always mention Jim Perillo, always mention him. They all say Perillo was the guy. He's the guy.
One of the other questions, we've got a few questions about Joel Schiavone.
Yes, yeah.
And we have, what year did he do it? Did he camp out on the roof? What was that about? So a couple of questions. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Joel Schiavone became the owner of the Nighthawks, with early 80s, maybe. I don't have the date right at my fingertips. It's been 12 years since I did it. But I interviewed Joel for the documentary and talked about that period of time when in order to keep the team solvent, he had to sell a few thousand season tickets. And he vowed to live on the roof of the Coliseum until he sold the tickets. So he built like this shack, plywood, some sort of sheathing on it to keep the wind out. And he vowed to stay on the Coliseum roof until he sold the tickets. Joel was a showman. He was a showman all the way. He knew how to attract publicity. And sure enough, his plea for people to buy season tickets and companies to buy season tickets generated a lot of publicity. It's quite one of those moments in Coliseum history that shows the personality of the people who were engaged with that building. Now, of course, hockey over time couldn't be saved in New Haven because hockey is an expensive sport in terms to put on, in terms of the payroll, et cetera, that you need. And you need to have, a really solid base of season ticket holders to give you the cash to operate. So Joel tried his best, but Joel always had New Haven close to his heart. He tried to make New Haven into a livable city that people wanted to go to, not because they have to go to it, but they wanted to go see a show, go to the Schubert, go to the Palace, go to the Coliseum. He understood the whole reason why people wanted to come to New Haven. Unfortunately, with the Nighthawks, we're concerned it didn't work out as well as he wanted it to.
Well, I mean, there's the fact that there is like a working kind of support system built in when you have a facility like that, where it's and you said it a lot in the presentation, talking about like how the businesses around it, kind of fed into it and vice versa, where and it's really interesting to see how things continue without it and then continue, and still are able to survive to today, even when something big like that leaves.
I think that's a great point. If you look at all the new sports facilities that are being built or have been built over the last generation, say 10, 20 years, they're all part of larger complexes. It's like the Yard Goats Dunkin' Donuts Park in Hartford. That's seen to be part of a larger development. There's going to be housing developed around that. So it'll develop into a little like Yard Goatsville, like they have Wrigleyville in Chicago. You look at, you tremendously sized, huge scale projects of football stadiums. They have apartments there. They have other entertainment venues connected with it. And so basically Roach's vision from '65 is being implemented today at a scale that I'm sure he'd never imagined. But nobody would build, I don't think, a standalone arena like the New Haven Coliseum today. It just doesn't make financial sense. And Mohegan Sun having that arena, that's casino is brilliant because people got there, they stay in the hotel, they get to play gambling if they want, shops, dinner, and then go to a game, a Connecticut Sun game, boom, it's right there. I mean, that's quite the wave of the present and the future. And Roach saw that. He was right. The Coliseum would fail unless it was part of a larger development.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few questions I think you kind of addressed is like what do sports and concert venues look like? And it's the idea of like a one-stop shop. You want to be able to go there, go out, have drinks, go to a club, do this, do that, go to the event, and then have someplace close to go back to. And we kind of see that with the casinos. They're kind of out of the way, or they're kind of removed a little bit. But seeing it in the heart of the city, remembering days of going, it's like, yeah, you get food, close by, you park the car, you go for a walk, you hang out, you get there early. It's different. I mean, downtown's just different now. So
yeah, it's different. It's the scale. I think it's more personal than collective or like a broad. It's not trying to have a broad appeal to a broad public, and that's perhaps why it works, because that's what this generation wants. I don't think a new Coliseum in New Haven would work by any stretch. They had the Westville music ball there in Westville, of course, the College Street Music Hall, great place to see a band. Music Bowl, great place to see a band. They're scaled for the audience that would want to go to shows right now. And I think downtown, would be, benefited if they did something with that site where the Coliseum once stood that had something other than housing, other than another apartment building or something. Just had something to do with some form of entertainment. Even a public skating rink or something like that. Just something there to get the community engaged and involved without making an enormous investment to do so, or gamble that this will work out, because we saw what happened with the Coliseum. It didn't work out, and now it's a parking lot. And it's been a parking lot for a long time.
From your research and looking at it, I mean, one of the questions that came up is, you mentioned the arena before and the events that were there. Do you think that there's the same reverence for the arena that we see for the Coliseum, or did not house enough events to kind of make the same impact that the Coliseum did?
Yeah, I think because the Coliseum really belonged to the baby boomers. It was just all the people getting, turning 16, 17, and 18, ability to stray from their parents, and to get out of the house a little bit with their friends. It was really geared for them. It was their house. The arena was really a generation before that. But the arena itself, I think, reflected a reality of a lot of folks that, like television, variety shows used to be popular, where Ed Sullivan would have 6 to 7 different guests on the show, juggling plates. Then Maria Callas would come out and sing. I mean, it was fantastic. Now you see that in the late night comedy shows, but they get a few guests and they're trying to all sell something. But the idea that on one day you'd have a ski jump in the middle of the building, and then the next day you'd have a circus, and the next day you'd have a Elton John concert. Yeah, those buildings don't exist anymore. They're too. They were made for a generation that was used to vaudeville, that was used to then the transition to a variety show on television. But now things are so, with the internet, with your choices and streaming, your choices are unlimited. You could just stay where you are and have the world come to you. Back in those days of the arena's heyday, you had to go to the world. And the Podoloff family brought it to New Haven, brought all these acts, brought all these interesting events, car shows, home shows, for example. They built a Sears house in the arena once. It was like for the home show,
Was there any events that afterwards people were like, oh, that didn't work? Or, I mean, you talked about some of the acts got banned from the Coliseum for a while. Some of them, it was so big that, it was such an event that they were there that people are still talking about it today. Were there any that kind of became a flop or just didn't work and people look back and go, oh, that was a bad idea?
Yeah. Well, who's that? Tommy, the drummer of Motley Crue. Yeah, he thought he would put a bungee cord up in the roof of the building, and someone didn't measure it. and he fell on his head. And that kind of ended the concert. That didn't work. That was not here, so, but no, there are, certain shows didn't sell out, and that became more increasingly pronounced, as the 90s emerged. The acts weren't necessarily calibrated for the New Haven crowd. Rap did very well in New Haven. Southern rock did very well in New Haven, but not all acts could sell out that building. But they would book it anyway. And there was another pressure, upside pressure coming from the acts themselves. They would prefer the Hartford Civic Center in its rebuilt fashion after the roof collapsed, because they could sell 5,000 more tickets. So as it turns out, the New Haven Coliseum became undersized for acts like Springsteen after the 70s. He'd go up to Hartford because he could sell 15,000 tickets instead of 10,000. So that was, that was a different sort of flop. They said, well, 30 miles north here, I can sell 5,000 more tickets and put that money in my pocket. So what are you going to do? You're going to go to the bigger venue.
And you mentioned their last show, and looks like we're at the end of our questions too. As we you said the last show was a wrestling show. Was it WWE or was it one of the other?
WWE, yeah.
Yeah. And do you think the connection between those two have to do a lot with the proximity to the headquarters and where a lot of that started and was built? Or do you think it was just a really good place and just the fans just supported it more?
New Haven's always been a pro wrestling town. And Vince McMahon, who was head of WWE at the time, knew that he could sell out that building or go to a near sellout. And the building was also very friendly for cameras. It had the right sort of setup for cameras. That's why the WWE taped a lot of their television cards there. Raw, stuff like that, were taped at the New Haven Coliseum because the Coliseum and its directors and its staff were very friendly to cameras. I mean, one of the things I didn't talk about was there are a number of commercials filmed at the Coliseum, including one for light beer by Miller, I guess. Miller Lite, yeah. New Haven was very friendly to the crews coming up from New York. They could come in, set up, do what they have to do, and go back to New York the same day. So that certainly played a role. I think it's important to note that Van Halen, who had a great band in the 80s and the 90s, had a chance to film a concert. They had a chance to pretty much film it anywhere. They could have filmed it in LA, but they chose the New Haven Coliseum. And their concert film, Live Without a Net, became one of the more popular concert films of all time. The band would say, New Haven, like that. They get up there and say, welcome to New Haven instead of New Haven. And it's a well shot, sounds great documentary film of a concert. It really shows the band and the crowd at that time, the mid-'80s, during its heyday.
So I want to say thank you for taking time tonight. I think it was a fascinating talk. We've had an amazing amount of attention on social media, on all our platforms, based on the pictures that we shared and this. If anybody missed any portion of it, it'll be on our Facebook page. You can go back and watch it after this ends. We will put it up on YouTube too, if you prefer to use that platform. Richard, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I hope I delivered what the folks wanted.
I think so. I think we had a really good reaction. We had some great questions. So I definitely believe that. For our regular viewers that come to all of our virtual events, our next event is going to be on October 19th at 6 p.m. And it is going to be a hybrid event. So there will be limited tickets available to come to the New Haven Museum and see it in person, as well as a virtual option. More details are coming within the next week for you to sign up and register and get your tickets. So keep an eye out on our social media platforms for the information on how to register. Thank you all. And Richard, anything in closing?
Yeah, I hope folks support the New Haven Museum. It's an exceptional museum that tells our story. And if we don't have places like the New Haven Museum, we don't have a story to tell because we don't have the artifacts to illustrate exactly what happened when. And as a documentary filmmaker, I'd be absolutely lost without the New Haven Museum and its staff, who go to great lengths to help, to find stuff, and to advise on what artifacts are there and what are not. So please support the New Haven Museum. It's an essential part of our community, and we wouldn't have a story without it.
Thank you so much for those kind words. We do have an amazing staff that usually goes above and beyond. And again, anybody wants to join us on October 19th for the life of Betsy Stockman. And some will be in person and some of you will be virtual, and hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.